upset, and turmoil. Cotton Valley had been in turmoil ever since Zedna cussed God and left, and the cotton crops were barely growing. It had not rained for 36 months already, and even though no one saw any rain in the past few years, they still planted their cotton seeds like years past. Each year the people would be hopeful that rain would fill the valley this time. The men would take big barrels down to the creeks and haul water back for some of the smaller crops, and that would give them a little money. That was the lifeline of every living soul in it, because the people relied on the cotton sales for their yearly wages. But news started coming in that the creeks were starting to dry up too. If the cotton year wasn't up, there were going to be a lot of poor mouths come wintertime. The story of the valley had rich history, just like the ground the people walked on every day. After the war, Montini's father came to the valley and started his own cotton plantation. But it was not just any plantation. It was for the black folk to make an honest living planting and selling their own cotton. They knew the work, since most of them had come out of the cotton field. It was a place that their children's children could claim a stake on something the old folk had worked so hard for. It was a place they didn't mind dying for and being buried there. The old windmill creaked and cracked with every blow of the hot wind. Montini put her hands over her eyes to block the sun as she looked off to the east and then off to the west for just an inkling of hope for some rain. She knew that by this time of the year the valley would be full with green grasses and lush gardens. Montini wanted a vegetable garden that year, but because the rains had not come, she knew she had gotten too old to carry water back and forth to the gardens. But she was thankful for the generosity of her neighbors, who, with thoughtful respect, came by to see about her well-being every other day. Every day Montini would look for the rain, hoping that God had calmed his anger against Zedna. She thought out loud and said, "Well, I guess God ain't forgave that girl." Montini thought about how Zedna and Preacher Dan had been arguing the day she left about the bad choices she was making. The wind carried Zedna's voice across the valley, whispering, "I cussed God, and now you die." So Preacher Dan died while trying to get the devil out of her. Montini took her time and sat down. She looked around the town, comparing the times now to the times then. She thought about her husband, Preacher Dan, who used to keep everyone on their toes. Before he died, his very presence gained respect from everyone in the town, everyone except Zedna. No matter how he tried to raise her the right way, she would always end up doing the opposite of what he said. Preacher Dan made sure she had most everything that a child could desire, but that wasn't enough. Before Zedna made her final exit of the town, she left the stench of disrespect. But what Montini didn't know was that Zedna didn't care, just as long as she could get as far away from the valley as possible. In the eyes of the people, Preacher Dan and Montini was the pillar of the community, helping people whenever they could. Sometimes Preacher Dan would have to leave late at night whenever someone would call about a death or a problem they couldn't handle, and Montini was proud to be called his wife. When he would raise his deep voice to preach the divine words of the Bible, she would show her proud look. But now all she had was a lonely house and resentment for Zedna. If it was not for her, she would still have her man with her. She felt like her husband spent too much time worrying about Zedna, even though she wasn't his child. Montini looked around at the valley again and imagined how beautiful it looked when the cotton bloomed. It was as if snow had fallen all around them. Just the thought that they wouldn't have a harvest this year made her feel scared and a little angry at Zedna. Montini thought she knew the reason why Zedna was so wild and wayward. It was because of Pepperjack. Every time Preacher Dan would confront her about her wayward ways, she would run straight down to Pepperjack's house. Pepperjack was known for her tough ways, and everybody knew she carried a gun around her thigh. But to Zedna, she was her best friend. If anyone knew where Zedna was, it was Pepper Jack. Sometimes Preacher Dan would lock the door and tell Zedna not to come back knocking late at night. However, Montini knew Zedna didn't care, because Pepper Jack would let her stay until morning. Montini didn't like that one bit. Zedna was her child. She wanted her to run to her arms and tell her all the secrets that a mother should know. She held a little hate in her heart for Zedna and a little jealousy in her heart against Pepper Jack. To her, Pepper Jack was not mother material. She cussed folks out, chewed tobacco, gambled like the men, and was never seen looking like a woman. She wore old overalls and an old wore-out wig. Montini would have offered her one of hers, but that jealousy she held in her would never release her heart to do so. Through all those thoughts, and truth be told, Montini wanted her daughter back, but didn't know where she had gone. Since Zedna left, she hadn't sent not one letter. Montini made her way to the back of her house and opened the back door. She looked out across the pasture and saw Pepper Jack's shack house. She saw the beaten path that Zedna used to go back and forth to her house. She knew she would have to build up some nerves because she was going down that same beaten path and get some answers out of Pepper Jack. She didn't know how she would receive her, nor did Montini know how Pepper Jack would come at her.